Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. For those of you new to the show, I am Ella, Jeff's assistant. Glad to have you join us today. So Jeff wanted to put out a brief video commenting on historian Allan Lichtman's announcement that he made a prediction that Kamala Harris is going to win the presidency. So Jeff had someone call him up and asked him to cast a chart on that prediction. And Jeff did. And it's quite interesting what we found there. So why don't we get started, Jeff? Share with everyone what the astrology has to say.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because, everybody's probably seen it. For anyone who hasn't, Allan Lichtman, as she mentioned, is a historian. And it sparked a lot of curiosity because he's predicting a Harris win.
My prediction system is unique. And as you said, it's been essentially right for 40 years. I would say 10 of 10, but I'm not going to relitigate 2000 here. And the way it works is it taps into the structure of how elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And if 6 or more of my 13 factors go against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Otherwise, they are predicted winners. And I finally come to my final prediction and concluded that the White House party, the Democrats, now represented by Kamala Harris, would not lose any more than 5 keys. Thus, my prediction is Kamala Harris will be a precedent-breaking president of the United States, the first woman president in U.S. history.
So someone had posed a chart to me, and I cast it. And again, I wanted to see if, he was correct. So I thought the chart was really interesting. And I thought we'd make this podcast about that. Well, what happened, I cast the chart. And of course, the Eastern Horizon astrology is always the querent. And in this case, you got to be a little careful with astrology because the Eastern Horizon isn't just the querent. See, I've done this a lot with people in sports games and so on and so forth. The Eastern Horizon is the person you name first or who the querent's choice was. And the 7th house is the opponent. Just like if you have a game or something that you're asking about. And I've seen it to be highly accurate. So the Eastern Horizon becomes Trump, which in this case was Mercury. And I'm putting this on the screen here. You can see this is Virgo on the Eastern Horizon. And you'll notice Mercury is deep in the 12th house, which makes Trump not as strong as you would think he would be. And Harris becomes the 7th house. Now, in traditional Vedic and ancient astrology, Pisces rules Jupiter, not Neptune, for any of you astrologers who are familiar with this. So Harris becomes Jupiter, and you can see she's right up past the midheaven in a house we call Cadent. That's the 9th house. Now, what does that mean? Well, she's in detriment, meaning she's in Gemini. That's opposite of her rulership. And it also is very accurate because Harris is in the White House. She's vice president, right? So you would expect her to be somewhat close to the 10th house, except she's weak and she's cadent. So is Trump weak and cadent as well. He is in the 12th house, which is not a good placement, except when I looked at the chart deeper, I went, well, wait a minute. We got Mars at the midheaven. Now, you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, Mars at the midheaven always shows trouble, but it represents even more in the election. Notice Harris's 2nd house is also Mars, and also it is the Lord of the 3rd. So I think this is fitting with what we've been talking about on previous podcasts. We're going to see trouble around this election. It's either going to be riots or outbreak of war, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to tell you, Jack Keane, who is a 4-star general, was just talking about how we are more apt to be close to war than any time since World War II.
I just finished a congressional commission that looked at the national defense strategy of this administration, Biden and Austin as well. And I was on a commission that did Trump Mattis strategy. And what has fundamentally changed from one administration to the other is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea working together, collaborating, coordinating, and truly helping each other. And the fact that they perceive the United States as being weak and they're going to take advantage of it. So they have been incentivized by their perception of us. It's no isolated event that there's war in Europe for the first time since World War II on a major scale, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. No accident that, or isolated event, that what's taken place in the Middle East, where Iran has operationalized all of their proxies to stranglehold Israel into making people stop living there and destroy the state of Israel and push the United States out of the region. And President Xi's aggression has increased dramatically. So yes, our commission concluded we have not seen a period of time like this since World War II. And as a result of it, it is possible that the United States could find itself in a conflict with China, and at the same time, Russia and Iran up their game because they believe the United States would be challenged to handle the conflict with China, much less two others, and that would mean global war.
Now, isn't that interesting? That's exactly what we've been talking about in the astrology, where I've mentioned Uranus is going through the Pleiades and it's retrograding back between now and October over one of the most evil fixed stars in the sky, and that's Capitalgo. And also it's in the Pleiades of the Seven Sisters. So interesting stuff. Look back at this chart again. You'll see Mars at the midheaven. But here's what's really peculiar about this chart. Trump, who is Mercury, is making a sextile, which is a 60-degree geometric aspect to Mars at the midheaven. So what does that mean? Well, when a planet aspects the signifactor from a powerful place like Mars is doing, actually, Trump's signifactor is applying to Mars at the midheaven, which is kind of like Indiana Jones in the snake pit, who has someone come up and drop him a rope, and he's able to climb up out of it. So that's kind of the analogy. This is called rendering or conferring light in the ancient astrology, which means Mercury is making an aspect to a planet in the midheaven in an angle, and it pulls it out of its kind of detrimental spot. It favors Trump winning, not Harris. Why? Because if you look at Harris's signifactor, which is Jupiter, it is being squared by the sun. And even though it's not happening right away, it ultimately will. And I think based on this chart, not to counteract Allan Lichtman's 13 keys and all that, but the astrology actually says otherwise. The moon, the all-important moon, is actually making a trine to Saturn, while at the same time, Sun and Saturn are making an opposition at the time of this question. I think we're going to see a lot of trouble coming up around this election. That's not on the radar screen yet, but it's going to start to come on the radar screen as we get closer to October and the election time. Some events are likely to happen. I hope they don't, but this chart also indicates that. So now let's jump to the same analysis in Vedic astrology. And you'll see, ironically, that Trump is still Mercury. He is Lord of the Ascendant in the 12th house, kind of isolated from the governmental, hierarchy, if you will. And Harris is still Jupiter in the 9th house. But what's most important is Trump is in a lunar mansion that is ruled by Ketu. And Ketu always rules spiritual karmas. There's something going on here that might be much stronger than we think about some spiritual intervention here in the end. Also, Trump is in the second division called a pada of the lunar mansion, interestingly enough, called Maga. And that's not mega, that's Maga with an H. And I thought that was really ironic. So Vedic astrology, again, like I say, is much more complex than the analysis in tropical, and especially in what we call prashna. You can see in the Navamsha, which is the 9th harmonic chart here, will Trump or Harris get in? Well, you can see Trump is in a trine. He's in what we call the Earth trines, which is Taurus, Capricorn, and Virgo. And Harris is actually in the 8th house in Leo. Now, you're always supposed to look at exactly where do these fall in the prashna chart. Well, notice Trump's signifactor falls in the 9th house in the birth chart. And where is Harris's? In the 12th, where Trump is in the birth chart. So ironically, again, the 9th division chart shows Trump again to be a little bit stronger in the final analysis And Harris being in the 8th is not a good omen in the in the birth chart. So I should say in the 12th in the birth chart. So she is, again, you could see in Leo, which is the 12th sign of the birth chart. So I would have to say, again, I know a lot of people are skeptical of astrology, but we're going to get a chance to see how this turns out. And I can tell you the divisional charts are quite strong, as well as the birth chart. Again, with Trump's signifactor beholding Mars in the 10th house, which is the achievement of the White House, tends to be more favorable. Again, it doesn't look like it's going to be an easy election here. It's going to definitely be a very manipulated election, in my opinion, based on everything I'm seeing here. But a lot of subterfuge here is likely to be at play. This is not going to be an easy election for either one of them. So again, I'd have to say, not to disagree with Allan Lichtman's 13 keys and all the things he's saying, I would say the astrology shows there's going to be a lot of trouble around this election. It's not going to be smooth. It's likely to go through a lot of roller coaster ride emotions where 1 minute's going to look like Harris, next minute's going to look like Trump. But it shows, according to the astrology, I would say that Trump wins. And by the way, I want to clarify something. This isn't just will Trump win, because you got to remember, in this country, I don't think we've seen an honest election probably since JFK. In fact, Jerome Corsi was just on Coast to Coast, and he was mentioning that a man named Robert Fugit had found all this tampering in 16 states with flipping of votes, and they're actually suing. This is actually going to court, and they're actually suing them because they're finding how they literally have algorithms that can flip the votes. Near the end of a voting process, they can actually add a little bit, subtract a little bit. And this is not a conspiracy theory. They're actually finding hard data, and they're taking it to court. And of course, we've heard of the SAVE Act right now. And of course, we have the House just voted for the SAVE Act, which basically says you have to provide an ID in order to vote, and no illegals can vote. Except here's the problem. The Senate will probably not pass it. And even if the Senate does, Joe Biden's going to rubber stamp it and veto it. So I wouldn't put a lot of faith in the SAVE Act. So something here is going to happen, almost a little bit like a divine intervention. And I would say this election is probably much different than any other election we've seen, probably since the Civil War. Why? Because we have, again, that 84-year cycle of Uranus over the Pleiades, which is very dangerous for the world at war, as Jack Keane was saying. And secondly, because the United States is in a Pluto return. It's never been in a Pluto return. This is literally a time when I think we're going to see the difference between nationalism and communism. And this is not about Trump and Harris. This is about nationalism and globalism, which is permeating the entire globe. I know I talk to clients all over the world, and I'm hearing, and you see on the news what's happening in Europe and Australia and many other countries. It is really getting scary. And this is the owners at the top of the pyramid dishing out their funds and controlling the politicians. Remember, they want obedient politicians. And this is, again, an interesting chart. And we're going to see, obviously, and to finish what I was saying earlier, this isn't just who will win the election, but who will win the election and get in the White House. That was the real question. I should have clarified that right at the beginning, but that was the question. I would tend to say this looks like a real roller coaster ride and a very angry, intense situation. But my call is that the astrology says, in the end, Trump will probably prevail based on these charts.
Wow. There you have it. There you have it. It's interesting what you said about, first of all, we know it's going to be complete mayhem coming, right? I'm surprised complete mayhem hasn't already started. I don't know what they're waiting for. But, that's in the astrology too, when things are really predicted to pop.
It's really interesting, this information by Jerome Corsi and that Robert Fugit, where they're literally coming up with evidence. And of course, other people have too. If you remember, I think it was 1,000 Mules or something that was put out. I forget the name of the movie, but it was a good movie. And the people who came up with that data actually got put in jail. They got put in prison. I think they got out. So we are dealing with a system that literally Eisenhower had warned about in the late 50s that is now present. And of course, JFK, I think, was sacrificed on the altar of that, government control at that point in time. And we are at a very critical time here. This is very, very interesting. And again, when I did the analysis on both Trump and Harris's chart, Harris has the Jupiter in the 12th house. She's not that strong. And she's also in a Rahu Dasha. And again, I'm not favoring Trump or favoring Harris. I can tell you Trump has his Jupiter in the midheaven, which is dangerous, and that's much stronger. That only happens once every 12 years. And mind you, presidents are only in office every 4 years. So Trump has a stronger progression. He's also got Jupiter is heading towards his sun this spring. But the danger for Trump is, and again, I mentioned this before, literally they read the verdict on him when Uranus crosses midheaven in June of this year. Now, notice that trial is probably going to get dismissed due to the Presidential Records Act, or Immunity Act, I think it is. And then also, we're going to find that it's probably going to get thrown out on appeal. Moreover, his sentencing has been delayed after the election, and also the Jack Smith case has been delayed. So he's in grave danger right now of more assassination attempts because he's got Uranus crossing over his midheaven 2 more times. That'll be in December and another time next March. Plus, he's got literally on the 6th of October, he's got Uranus squaring Mars, meaning Trump. And that comes back in May. So he's in grave danger, whether he gets in or doesn't get in. And according to the chart, he's likely to get in. But this is dicey times. And again, remember, we have that final Pluto return on the United States. And in the middle of October, we've got this Uranus going over that fixed star. And we're going to be talking a lot on our lives about other energies that are coming up that are too detailed to get into right now. But that's my pick here on what the astrology says. And I'm trying to be as unbiased as I can. I'm not favoring Harris or Trump or Harris. I'm just looking at this interrogation that someone asked and reading it. And this is an interesting thing. We're going to find out soon enough. The election's only 57 days away from this podcast.
Yep. We're going to find out soon enough. Well, I know you want to do more of these astrological commentaries. So, these little pops, maybe 15 minutes or so long up until the election, because everybody's chirping about something, right? But it's interesting that person asked you about Allan Lichtman's, his prediction. So, well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much for this. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Please join us on our lives. We have them Mondays and Thursdays, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, talking about astrology, of course. What else? Thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll see you real soon.